Yeah, welcome everyone. Like Charlotte said, just wanted to provide a bit of an update as to where we are, and as well any additional input. We ran a criteria setting workshop with the Environmental Professionals Working Group and the Species Recovery Group that we have set up for the local nature recovery strategy. This was a couple of weeks ago now, and it was really to develop the criteria that we'll use to prioritise habitats and species, which will then help guide us to our priorities. So to help us actually identify the priorities for those habitats, as well as their potential measures. Today, like I say, just kind of want to run through the criteria itself. We also discussed as a bit of a warm-up session, discussed the challenges and opportunities in Greater Lincolnshire, any overlooked habitats from our list of habitats that we have, as well as discuss what the actual LNRS priority is. So although we're prioritising habitats, the LNRS priorities are the outcome for that habitat, so the end result that we're looking at for that habitat and that species. And then, yeah, just to share kind of the output from that workshop session. So just a quick recap in terms of local nature recovery strategies. They're a new system of spatial planning tools for nature recovery across all of England. They're to help guide and direct more focused action for nature recovery. And as I said, this is happening all across England, 48 different areas, and this is with the ambition to build a national nature recovery network, as well as provide some additional environmental benefits. So those additional wider environmental benefits that I'm talking about kind of stem from the Environmental Improvement Plan. So the government's set up 10 statutory goals that they'd like. They've set up 10 goals that we as a society can work towards. The local nature recovery strategies themselves, the guidance suggests that all local nature recovery strategies should be contributing to mitigating climate change, improving the water environment and mitigating flood risk. So these are some of the environmental objectives underneath those overarching goals in the Environmental Improvement Plan. So if I just take us back for a second, local nature recovery strategies will particularly be contributing towards the goals of thriving plants and wildlife, improving our mitigation of climate change, as well as reducing the risk of harm from environmental hazards, which sits under that improving our mitigation of climate change goal. So when we sat down with the working group, we discussed kind of just more general for Greater Lincolnshire opportunities and challenges. Some of the opportunities that we identified. I should have started with challenges first, so my apologies for that. So some of the challenges that we identified was the rising sea level, increased flooding and drought, loss of intertidal habitat, declining water quality and water availability, and yeah, a number of different challenges that we face in the county, as well as competing land use with housing, wildlife, renewable energy, agriculture. And as well, some also more general challenges, so like difficulties with accessing grants, so limited guidance and awareness of the grants available to be able to support nature recovery itself, as well as some the opportunities that come with that. So there is funding available through ELMS, which is environmental land management schemes, green finance through biodiversity net gain and carbon credits, and as well some general, like I say, some general opportunities, so improving education, awareness and upskilling, as well as natural flood mitigation, connectivity of habitats. I mean, in Greater Lincolnshire, we know we have some many isolated pockets of semi-natural habitat, but they are very much in isolation. And then we've got opportunities with improving to more nature-friendly farming practices, marginal land improvements, access to nature, and improved habitat management, as well as the reduction and removal of threats like pollutants and invasive non-native species. So as a little kind of thoughts, as a little exercise, if you've got any thoughts about opportunities and challenges you recognise in Greater Lincolnshire, it'd be good to either put them in a chat or we can discuss them at the end. But yeah, any thoughts of opportunities and challenges that you recognise in Greater Lincolnshire? As well, we looked at our habitat long list. So in Greater Lincolnshire, it was initially suggested that we was going to use UK HAB to describe habitats and classify habitats in the local nature recovery strategy, but new advice has been released from DEFRA, which suggests to move away from UK HAB due to licensing issues and move under the JNCC descriptions of habitats. So we listed out the 31 habitats that we have that fit under those categories within Greater Lincolnshire, but some of these descriptions don't capture all of the species, all of the habitats that we have here. So I did circulate a worksheet earlier, and again, if there's any additional habitats that you feel like haven't been represented on that list, please let us know, and we can add that to the long list and circulate afterwards. So in terms of our priorities and potential measures, so I know when I've been saying about using criteria to prioritise habitats and species, the approach that we're wanting to take, or that we're taking, is to prioritise the habitats and species and then go wider for input on those priorities for those specific habitats and species. This was the approach we'd initially taken, and as new advice has arisen, as new advice from DEFRA has arisen, there's different ways to approach this. But in terms of the actual LNRS priorities, as I said, it's not the habitats and species specifically, but it's the end result. So what we want the outcome to be for those habitats and species. So I'll put an example here. So the actual priority, the local nature recovery priority for upland peat would be to improve the condition of and increase for the purpose of increasing carbon sequestration, and as well improving the abundance of breeding bird species in upland peat. And then the potential measures are how you action those priorities, so re-wetting blanket bog. But yeah, so this is the final product, but we're developing a process to be able to get to that point. So as I said, the guidance was released. The prioritisation guidance suggests gathering information from stakeholders and considering possible priorities from and potential measures from existing plans and strategies. We've asked the working groups, including yourselves here, if you have any plans and strategies, to send them through. So they all should have been collected and gathered. If you have any plans and strategies that you haven't sent, that you would like for us to review, then please do let me know, and I can forward on the appropriate form so that we can collect and gather that information. But yeah, and then we have to, it's suggested you scope that long list basically of the priorities that have been identified. And then what happens is it undergoes a process of shortlisting, so balancing a criteria-based and preference-based factors. So the criteria is the evidence base, and the preference base is obviously the public and expert opinion. And then using this system, it should be able to pull out our final list of priorities. As I said, our approach is slightly different. Not that it's wrong, but it is slightly different. But in terms of what the end result is, when we're deciding what those priorities, the LNRS priorities are, the actual end result are for those habitats and species, we can only include LNRS priorities that contribute to national objectives in that list, as well as address the pressures and opportunities in Greater Lincolnshire. We will not have LNRS priorities that will address co-benefits. So the priorities themselves, it is a biodiversity first strategy. So the priorities themselves can't be for the benefit of can't be for considering co-benefits, so social and economic benefit. This doesn't mean that the LNRS doesn't contribute to those co-benefits. This just gets brought back in at a later stage. So during the mapping, we can consider where the best place to carry out those potential measures associated to those priorities can not only benefit biodiversity first and the wider environmental benefits, but also we can direct them and ensure that co-benefits are also considered at that stage. And as well, the priorities, the final LNRS priorities can't be site specific, so it cannot be set to one specific location. Catchments, so for rivers, catchments are fine, and specific river systems are fine. But yeah, specific site level locations, this is not to be included in the final LNRS priorities. And in terms of species, when we're prioritising species, it's only species that need targeted habitat management, improvement to the environmental quality and bespoke conservation action that need to be prioritised. Those that are data deficient or don't need action on the ground, as well as that don't need action within England or that are vagrants and occasional visitors, will also be excluded from that long list, from that prioritisation exercise. And it's not to say that the species that are data deficient, once they're removed, they're not considered ever. It just means that it's a recognition that currently we can't do anything about that species unless we know its either autoecology, so what it needs to survive in the environment, as well as its population and distribution. We need to be able to have something that's measurable, but these species can be brought in future iterations of the LNRS once the research and that background information has been gathered. So the methodology for prioritisation suggests using criteria-based a criteria-based approach and a preference-based approach. So as I said, the criteria is the drawing on evidence and expert knowledge. As well, the preference-based approach is the tally of mentions and how frequently a priority is supported in existing plans across Greater Lincolnshire. And it needs to be a balanced approach for prioritisation. So in terms of the guidance that's been released on how the criteria should be set up, there's themes, general themes. So there was if the species and habitat are of particular importance or could contribute to the creation and enhancement or connectivity of the landscape. And if the priority helps to deliver one or more of the national environmental objectives. It's also to consider the urgency of the issue, and if it's already improving and getting worse, as well as if there's opportunities for us to align and join up with our neighbouring counties on their priorities. So in terms of species, there's also been another set of considerations, and kind of building upon what I've just said for kind of general considerations. It's urgency, so if the species has urgent requirements, if it'll be easy to deliver the measures needed for, or not easy, but feasible to deliver the measures needed for those species. So local nature recovery strategies need to have achievable priorities for species and habitats. As well, if they contribute to national species recovery. Again, if there's opportunities to join up across the landscape, as I said earlier, the local nature recovery strategy's ambition is to develop a nature recovery network. So joining up across LNRS boundaries with our neighbouring counties is really important in being able to develop that network. As well, maximising benefits, so through the targeted action for that species, would this bring about other biodiversity and environmental benefits? And that if we didn't take action, are there any species or assemblages of species that are likely to be affected by climate change if action wasn't taken? Additionally, it's also suggested to consider species where pre-existing initiatives have already taken place, and it's important to note that this is where it can add additional benefit, but kind of recognising that importance of if there's existing work already occurring, that we can build upon that. So in terms of the preference-based approach, when discussing with the working group, we did run a public survey back in September to December last year. We've suggested that we use those results as the results from that survey. We had 16,000, just over 1,600. Sorry, that's a large number. Just over 1,600 responses for the public survey, which went out through every door in Greater Lincolnshire, as well as was shared by many of you and hopefully undertaken by many of you as well. So making sure that we recognise and take into consideration that the results from that public survey in our decision making, as well as considering expert opinion. So we provided for the workshop an example criteria. So this was for the Cornwall LNRS pilot, and this was kind of our basis, and it was checking that if any of these were suitable for Great Lincolnshire themselves itself, and then making sure the definitions for that were tight and understandable, so we can use that criteria moving forward. So as I said, our approach to using the criteria is to prioritise the habitats and species, and then agree the priorities and potential measures for the habitats and species identified. In Greater Lincolnshire, we've got a vast number of species and habitats to consider, and it was a way to ensure that no habitat is overlooked, and potentially we can create priorities for those habitats across the board. And as I said, the intention of the workshop was to develop the suitable criteria to prioritise habitats and species, helping to guide our agreement of priorities for the Greater Lincolnshire LNRS. And as well, we also wanted to identify a suitable scoring and weighting system for that criteria. So how do we score the habitats against each set of criteria, and should there be a higher weighting for certain criteria over another? The organisations that attended that workshop included ourselves at GLMP, Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, Lincolnshire Wolds Countryside Service covering the national landscape, Lincolnshire Chalk Streams Project, Doddington Hall Environment Agency, Lincolnshire County Council, Forestry Commission, and so on. So we had some representation from independent species. So in the species group, we had Butterfly Conservation attend, and we also had David Shepherd who's an independent entomologist. So we did have representation from both the environmental professionals working group as well as the species recovery group. And the outputs that we got from that, I have circulated these, but it is still needing to be tightened and defined even more, just to provide that additional clarity. So I have provided these in the invite. So please feel free to look over them and provide any comments that you may have. But in terms of our thought process, those overarching kind of themes that I discussed earlier, that you know, what DEFRA has suggested we consider in our criteria, we tried to ensure that we covered those in the criteria as we developed them. So making sure that we took into consideration if the species or habitats of particular importance in terms of creation, enhancement and connectivity of the landscape. And yet just those overarching themes were covered. In the workshop itself, like I say, we still need to tighten definitions for those criteria and finalise the scoring system for this, and then test the scoring system. We need to make sure that this criteria works and that our approach works for this. So to make sure nothing is overlooked. But in terms of in terms of doing this, I'll be tightening these and then recirculating, and then hopefully I shall have a finalised set of criteria which I'll be able to share with you all that works, and we'll be able to actually identify those habitat and species priorities, and then we can work towards our LNRS priorities for those habitats and species. I know using the word priorities I've used it quite frequently, so yes, I just want to clarify that we're prioritising habitats and species first, and then we'll create the outcomes for those habitats and species through wider engagement with yourselves to really help develop and establish that. And then, as I said, this will help us agree those potential measures and finalise those priorities for the LNRS. That was a quick whistle-stop tour on our presentation, but please feel free if you have any questions. I think obviously through the presentation I've asked a couple of things, so it might be worth us having a discussion on those challenges and opportunities that that you may recognise in Greater Lincolnshire that hasn't been represented on that list as well. And in addition, we can discuss the criteria and our approach. But yeah, if there's any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Emily. I'm just going to stop the recording.